And this person comes down the stairs and they come out, and I felt like they were looking past me. And then I was like, is that the person I'm going to talk to? And I was just standing there. And then they made contact with me. And then they said, are you Mrs. Warman? And I said, yes. And the person looked at the resume and said, okay. Now, at the time, I didn't pay attention to it, but there was like this hesitation, like a little bit of a hesitation, but I didn't pay attention to it because, I'm just trying to do my best, trying to put on my best face, trying to go in there and impress, right? Get this work because this place is blah. So I get in there and she says, she shakes my hand and she said, okay, Miss Warren, we can go into this room. And she took me into the room and I could tell that that lady was not impressed with me. This is not the face that she expected to see. Okay. I'm saying that without any, hard proof, but it was just like sometimes I would feel things before I know why I feel them. You know what I'm saying? Like, so when I was there, I got the feeling that she just was not going to give you this job. Like, this is not going to be your job. And I didn't know what to do with that information at the time when I understood it. So I was doing my best in the interview, trying to put on my best face, smiling, all the things I tell you to do in your interviews. I was doing them, and this is not the face she wanted to see. Now that I look back at it, she looked past me because she wasn't expecting to see a black person. So not everything is racism, but this case with this woman, yeah, that one was racism. I'm telling you, the lady did not expect. My name is Carolise Warman. Warman is actually a German name because my husband's family has history with Germany and World War II and all that stuff. So that's where the name comes from. So when I married him, I took his name. And so Carolise is not really a black name either. So they didn't know what to look for. And so she took me to the interview. And this is why I know it was racism. She took me to the interview and she sat down across from me. And she started asking me a bunch of questions that had nothing to do with the job at all. The question she was asking me was never on the job description. The things that she was saying is like she's expecting me to fail. For example, she said, one of our offices is in Brazil, and we're going to need the business analyst to be able to elicit requirements in Portuguese. Do you speak Portuguese? Really? Really, bitch, really? That's what I was going in my head. I was like, really? Really? Like, don't you think that if I had seen must speak Portuguese on the job description that I would have applied for this job, I would have known that that's something I cannot wing. I can't wing being able to speak Portuguese. So why would you come into the job interview and start throwing all these random things that was never a part of the job description into the interview? You're just trying to have a reason to say that I don't qualify. That's what you're doing. And so I could have put her in her place at the time, but I'm a very reserved person. You really have to get me really riled up for me to really, like just point it out to you. So I just told her, no, I don't speak Portuguese. Now I could have said that I speak Spanish and I speak Mandarin and all that stuff because I do, but I already knew that was not going to be my job. Like the spirit already told me that. So I was like, let me just finish this sham interview and just get out of here. Right? Because I already know what time it is. Okay.
And I get there early, and I get there about 15 minutes early. And this is how it all began. So I get there early and she was annoyed. The person that I was interviewing with, she was like, why are you here so early? And I'm like, I don't know. I took a bus and I got here fast and I'm here. And it was literally right in front of Times Square. It was right in front of the New York Times building, if you're familiar with New York. So anyway, I'm there and I'm like, it's cool, I'll wait. So I step aside and I'm there waiting. She finally lets me in, and she's not the fashion designer. She's, I guess, her head of marketing or her head of something. I don't really remember. This was a lot of years ago. But anyway, she starts talking to me and asking me questions, and I'm like, yeah, I just graduated. I really don't have very solid experience in the job market as of right now. I've been working while I was in college. I worked all the years that I was in college, but it wasn't really like a big girl job, I would say. It wasn't an entry level job. It was an hourly job. It wasn't salaried. Like, I didn't feel like it was a real job, even though it totally was. So she's like, okay, yeah, blah, 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 lets me talk. She was okay. She wasn't the worst person that I ever interviewed with. She's like, whatever. So I felt comfortable. Then she's like, oh, well, the designer is actually here. And I was like, okay. She's like, do you want to meet her? I'm like, well, if she's going to be my boss, might as well. And I get up and I pull out my hand to shake her hand, because that's what we do here. And she wouldn't shake my hand. So I was just like, okay. I just put my hand down, like, okay, some people are like that. I'm not gonna hold it against her. So we sit down and she starts asking me about myself, and I'm like, my name's Catherine, la la la, my interests, my hobbies, where I went to school, what I studied, la 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 la. So she starts telling me about herself. She tells me that she was a VP for Victoria's Secret, and she's the head of I don't know how many different companies, and she decided to start her own company. Understandable. I'm sitting there like, okay, cool. So she asked me about my education. She's literally holding my resume in front of her face. I mean, she can see where I went to school, what my jobs have been like, whatever. So she's asking me actually what kind of experience I have. And I told her, I was like, well, I have several years of customer service experience, yada, yada, yada. So she looks at me and she tells me, she's like, you really don't have any experience. And I'm sitting there like, okay, I mean, if you feel that way, what am I gonna say? And she's like, are you always complacent? Do you always agree with what everybody says? And I was like, excuse me? So she changed the subject and she's like, well, are you into fashion? And I'm like, well, I like fashion. She's like, well, what kind of designers do you wear? Let me think about that. So I'm there like, well, I don't really wear designer. She's like, well, where do you shop? And I'm like, well, I am super young. I come from, a working class family in an urban neighborhood. Like, what do I wear? I wear Forever 21. I wear American Eagle. I wear H&M. I wear, those kind of things, which I still, by the way, wear. So when I'm naming those stores, she's just cringing. She's just like, and I'm like, what is wrong with this lady? She's a fashion designer. She designs cashmere, which is very, very, very expensive. So she pulls out her laptop and she's like, you should be, you're going to have to be wearing these kinds of clothes so that you can know what to relate to the customers, blah, blah. And I'm there like, you want me to buy a $400 sweater? Mind you, the salary that they were talking about was like non-existent. They were like, well, there's going to be an internship period, and after that we'll discuss hourly, blah, blah, blah. And this interview was just getting worse and worse, and I'm sitting there like, what is wrong with this lady? Like, she kept finding ways to gun me down or like discourage me, and that's how I felt. So I kept pushing on. I'm like, no, I can do it, that's fine. I'll work with it. Like, I needed to prove myself that I wasn't scared of what she was saying that I would need to do for this position. She caught on to my accent. I guess I have a slight, Spanish accent. Spanish is a language that I speak very fluently, and it is the first language that I learned. Even though I was born in this country, my parents only spoke Spanish to me because that's the only language that they knew, and I learned English when I was in school. So I guess while I was nervous, I must have, some words might have come out a little bit funny. And she's like, do you speak Spanish? And I was like, yes, I do. I'm bilingual, which I thought was a good thing in most jobs that I've ever gone on an interview for. They like that I speak Spanish as well. She's like, what language do you speak the most? And I was like, English. I speak English the most. She's like, well, do you know the national anthem? This is where it went. And I'm there like, yes, I'm American. Do you know the national anthem? She's like, can you recite it? And I look at the other lady, and she's like, and I look at her, and I'm like, what is going on right now? But in my head, I wasn't thinking about it just yet. I was just like, okay. So I recite the national anthem. All of it. Okay. Let that sink in. So after which, she tells me that she feels that I would be I would be an okay fit for her company, but that she's not sure, that there's a lot of, that I have no experience, and that I seem very weak. I left.
So I interviewed for an industrial engineering / process improvement job at a manufacturing company. And I interviewed with a gentleman who was the head of engineering / chief operating officer / director of operations. I'm not really sure what his title was exactly, but essentially a plant manager. The situation was I had sent in my resume for a posted position, and they had contacted me and brought me in for an interview. I think I was the first person to apply or something. It was very early in the process. Anyway, so this guy makes me wait for 45 minutes or something. We were scheduled for 1 p.m. and I was there, and I was waiting until 1:45 p.m. until they got around to talking to me. And I remember their opening line. They have my resume on their desk, and they look at it, and they look at me shaking their head, and they say, "What makes you think that you can work here? You're not qualified for this job." Just like that. And this kind of annoyed me because I was qualified for this job. I had done this job before for many years, but my title was different. And I remember all the time I was speaking, this guy was looking at me, shaking his head, dismissing what I was saying, like, just like that. And I'm thinking, well, why did you call me here if you honestly feel that I'm not qualified to do the job for some reason? Anyway, the interview went downhill from there. I remember thinking, if you had paid me double my current salary, I would still not want you as my boss. And on the way out, the lady that was the director of HR told me that I could log into their website to see the status of my application, just for that personal touch. So I said, well, that's good to know, but I withdraw my application. And a few weeks later, she left, and they were looking for a new director of HR. I wonder why.
So I show up to this job interview. The woman that originally interviewed me walked up to me, she said hi, she was super friendly, and said, "Now I'm just gonna warn you, there's gonna be some big personalities in that room today." And I was like, cool, whatever, I can handle it. I was first thinking like, all right, these are gonna be some really outgoing people, really loud. That's when I think when someone says someone has a big personality, right? So I walk in and it's just her, me, and then one person walks in. He's an okay guy. He was very, very to the point with his questions. He did frequently cut me off with my answers to ask another question, so hardly any of my thought processes or my answers were really fully developed by the time he wanted to move on to a different question. Often me thinking and feeling like I didn't fully answer his questions. And then 2 other people walked in. One guy never spoke the entire time. One man came in and he sat right next to me and he shook my hand, introduced himself. I'm assuming he was top dog because he took control of the room from then on. Hardly anyone else spoke the entire time, including myself, to be very honest. Because he walked in, he sat down, and then he just started grilling me with questions. It almost sounded like some of the questions were condescending. Ugh, I'm sorry, I get really mad when I think about this. So he was asking me questions, what I want to do, what are my goals, why am I here? Then he says, "It sounds like you're not really sure who you are right now." And I'm like, I am in my 20s and I'm kind of figuring myself out like any other 20-something-year-old. As a person, I know who I am. As a job, of course I'm figuring that out. That's why I'm here getting a job. I didn't say everything exactly like that, didn't really say that last part, but this is just what's going on in my head. And then he says, "Oh yeah, you're only what, 24 or so? Yeah, you should, that's fine, that's normal." And I'm like, okay, so why did you even say that as if it was a bad thing to begin with? And then he asks a few more questions, pretty much cuts me off every single time that I try and answer any of his questions. And then he turns to me and says, "So how do you deal with men?" And I literally just turn to him and I say, "Can you be more specific?" And he says, "In my many years in business, I've noticed that women have many different idiosyncrasies than men when it comes to working in the office together. So I was just wondering, how do you handle men such as myself who, as the stereotype goes, middle-aged white men who have large egos? How do you handle us?" I'm just, oh my god. This was the moment that my gut was trying to tell me, you don't want this job. And at this point forward, I didn't give a shit. I really, really, really wish I had either told him off or just stood up and walked out. But in that moment, I was like, okay, you need to be professional, whatever. And so I answered his question and I said, well, I have worked with some men who do have large personalities, but like women, it depends on what type of communicator you are, as well as the man or woman, and you just have to learn their communication styles and how to work with them that way, whether it is a man or a woman. So I just essentially tried to put women in my answer as many times as possible and make it about communication. But he was just like, yep, okay. And he just kept calling himself a middle-aged white man with an ego, as if it was okay to be a jackass.
And then I got a call to come in for a third interview. But I get to my third interview. This time I'm walking there like, smash the first interview, smash the second interview. This nothing felt like. Oh my gosh. I get into the room and it's this like man in a perfect suit that was tailored to perfection. He had a crisp white shirt with the top button just like slightly undone, just like real professional. He was like dressed to the nines. His whole demeanor just was so, at the time I was incredibly intimidated. He just was very confident, I know the type of person I want, and if you don't meet it, we're not going to waste no time. So as soon as you walk into that door, that's the energy I received. And did I give that energy back? Absolutely not. I crumbled. But then he started asking me, he was like, what was the click-through rate? What was the open rate? What was the process behind blah blah blah? And I was like, I was not expecting him to ask me questions that related directly back to numbers. And I don't even remember what I said. I think I literally said to him, it was a really long time ago and I don't remember. And then he asked me to list out a few of my favorite products that I love that are in the same industry. So basically they're competitors. He basically wanted to know who my favorite products were that were his competitors. And I remember his face like slowly just being like more and more angry as I would list out his competitors, although he asked me to. But I think he just was like expecting at least one of their products. But that interview was just horrendous. I knew as soon as I walked out, I didn't get that job. So he basically stood up, shook my hand, and was like, thanks, but no thanks. But he didn't tell me then and there. I got another call from HR, was like, I'm really sorry. Oh, that's okay. Apparently it was down to me and this other girl. I'm like, it was not down to me. But this other girl ended up getting the role, and I remember being so upset, and I stalked her on LinkedIn to see what her history was, like her work history and her experience. I was like, looking at her experience, like, this ain't nothing too great. Like, I could have done this role. A few months later had passed, and I remember thinking, I wonder how she's going, because this place has a pretty bad rap. Their turnover is really high, so people go in and out all the time. There's such a novelty with working for them, but then once you're in there, I don't think it's a great experience. But yeah, so I was like, let me just see if she's still there, you know? And I check her LinkedIn again, and yes, I'm a stalker, but basically I check it again, and she had left. She left after 3 months. So I think it just like speaks volumes of, you have to trust in the journey that's meant for you personally, because as much as I wanted that role, I could have been that girl and just left after 3 months and then back on the market. But then I ended up finding a role that was better suited for me. It's so amazing to see how things work out, as much as it would have sucked at that point of time. When you look back on it, you can laugh. Like, I was laughing through that whole experience now, but it was not a funny matter going through that.
So a couple days later, I received an email that they wanted me to come in for an in-person interview. And I want to say that the interview itself was rescheduled like 1 or 2 times, which should have been a little bit of a sign to me from the beginning. But anyway, I go in for the interview, you know, I'm dressed very professionally. I have a copy of my resume and my cover letter. I get there a little bit early, you know, just trying to be as prepared and as professional as possible. And I kind of was like ready in my head, because I had obviously done several job interviews at this point. And most of the time, especially for a retail position, they always ask you the same kind of questions. Like, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Tell me a time where you had to overcome something difficult at work, and what did you do? How'd you deal with it? Crap like that. So I had like some answers prepared in my head. So I'm sitting there, I'm waiting. The woman finally comes out later than the scheduled time of our interview, which again should have been assigned to me. So she comes over, introduces herself, and then we go over to the room where we're gonna have our interview. And she, right off the bat, is just talking about herself. I like to hear people talk, you know, I like listening to people's stories, but at one point I'm just thinking to myself, like, when are we gonna actually get into the interview? You know, when you meet people that are just so into themselves and they just think that they're so much better than everyone, and all they want to do is talk about themselves and their own achievements and like try to impress you. That is the kind of person that this woman was. So finally, she starts asking me some questions. So one of the questions she asked me was, what's my favorite product at the moment? And I kind of figured that she didn't really care about what my response was. She was probably just asking me these questions because she just wants to see how I talk about products and how can I like sell something that I love, just to get a feel for like how I would be talking to customers and if I would be, you know, like a good salesperson. So I figured, okay, maybe that's all it is. And at this point already, I'm kind of feeling like things aren't going so well because she just did not seem satisfied with any of the responses I was giving her, which is a little discouraging because I was like, well, you're not even giving me a chance. Like, you're not even focusing on like the relevant experience that I have. You're not asking me any questions about myself or how my work performance is. You're literally asking me questions that, as far as I know, are not relevant to this position. So then she takes out this packet and she starts asking me questions that are traditional, like retail interview questions, like what are your strengths and weaknesses, etc. So she literally reads off the first question to me, and as soon as I start responding, she's just straight up not paying attention, like not making eye contact with me, just like, so what are some of your strengths and weaknesses? Not even acknowledging that I'm sitting right in front of her. Then she starts texting. Once I would stop speaking, she was just like, oh, okay, that's good. And then she'd read the next question. I would start speaking, she would start texting. And the whole rest of the interview, she was literally on her phone, texting with somebody back and forth. And she's like at one point like laughing. I was just in such disbelief. And I literally was sitting there, and I think at one point, like in the middle of my response, I just stopped because I was just waiting to see like if she would get off her phone and actually like make eye contact with me. And I could not believe what was happening. And I was like, is this some kind of joke? Is this a test? It was just so rude. And I just felt like I was wasting my time. I was wasting my breath, wasting my time being there. And it was really, really disappointing. But anyway, it all ended up working out for the best. I stayed at that marketing job for a few more months, and then I decided to quit and enroll myself in cosmetology school, and I graduated, got my license, and I have been working in a salon doing hair and makeup ever since. And I love my job so much. I'm making more money now doing this than what I was even making at my marketing job, and my hours are so much better. I get to make my own schedule. So yeah, it all worked out for the best.